Imagine you're 12 years old again. You're curious about the world, and you accidentally stumble across something online that completely changes how you view relationships, intimacy, and yourself. For most of us, that wasn't really an if, it was more of a when. We live in a world where explicit content is more accessible than ever before, and we're only just beginning to understand what that's doing to our minds, our relationships, and really our society as a whole. I do want to say though that this video will go into a little bit more explicit content than normal, and just kind of the contents of the video. If you click this video, you probably knew that. And this isn't going to be a preachy video either, telling you what you should or shouldn't do. It's really about examining something that's become so normalized, so embedded in our culture that we barely question it anymore. But maybe we should be questioning it. Maybe we should be asking, what is pornography actually doing to us? So let's start with the obvious, and that's accessibility. 30 years ago, accessing explicit material required effort. You had to be an adult, you had to go to an adult store, and you had to make a conscious decision. But today, it's 2 clicks away from any smartphone, tablet, computer, anything that has internet connection. There aren't really any real age verification systems that work. There aren't any meaningful barriers. A curious 10-year-old can access content that would have required a fake ID and considerable embarrassment just a generation ago. And here's the thing, this isn't happening in a vacuum. The average age of first exposure to porn is now somewhere between 11 and 13 years old. And just think about that for a second. These are kids who haven't even had their first real quote-unquote crush yet, and they're being introduced to sexuality through content that's often violent, degrading, and completely divorced from reality. That's like learning to drive by watching Tokyo Drift. But let's talk a little bit more about what this content actually contains, because I think a lot of people have this idea that it's just people having sex on camera. The reality is much darker in my opinion, because studies have found that the majority of mainstream content contains acts of aggression, violence, or degradation. We're talking about content that normalizes choking, slapping, and other forms of technical violence as standard sexual practices. And this isn't fringe content, this is mainstream. So what happens when developing brains are exposed to this? When your first introduction to sexuality involves violence and degradation presented as normal and desirable. The research is pretty clear. It shapes expectations, behaviors, and attitudes in profound ways. Young people are learning that this is what sex looks like, what women want, what men should do. They're learning that intimacy involves domination, that consent is optional, that women exist primarily for male pleasure. The psychological impacts are staggering. We're seeing unprecedented levels of sexual dysfunction among young men. ED rates that used to affect maybe 5% of men under 40 now affect up to 30%. Porn-induced ED is a real phenomenon where the brain becomes so accustomed to the intense, unrealistic stimulation of pornographic content that normal human intimacy no longer registers as arousing. But it goes deeper than just physical dysfunction. We're talking about rewiring reward systems in the brain. Porn triggers massive dopamine releases similar to drugs like coke. The brain adapts by reducing dopamine sensitivity, which means that you need more and more extreme content to get the same hit. I mean, this is literally how addiction works. And unlike substance addictions, this one fits in your pocket and it's available 24/7. The impact on relationships is devastating. I mean, how do you maintain intimacy with a real person when you've trained your brain to expect the unrealistic bodies, scenarios, and performances of porn? I mean, real partners can't compete with endless variety, perfect lighting, edited bodies, scripted performances, and relationships suffer. Intimacy becomes performative rather than connective. And let's talk a little bit about how this is kind of bled into everything else. I mean, we live in an incredibly sexualized culture now. Social media platforms are filled with increasingly explicit content. Music videos, ads, movies, everything is over the top, hypersexualized. OnlyFans has normalized the idea that anyone can and should commodified their sexuality, and we've created a culture where sexual value is the primary currency, especially for young women. This normalization is insidious. I mean, it happens gradually, so we don't notice it. What would have been shocking 10 years ago is now just like Tuesday on Instagram. We've moved the goalposts so far that we've lost track of where normal used to be. Teenagers are growing up thinking that having an OnlyFans is a legit career aspiration, that sending explicit photos is kind of just part of dating, that if you're not willing to perform increasingly extreme sexual acts, that you're prudish or uptight. And the mental health implications are enormous. Rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide among young people have skyrocketed alongside the rise of internet porn and social media sexualization. This isn't coincidental. Now it's not the only factor contributing to this, but it is a big part of it. But anyways, when your self-worth becomes tied to your sexual desirability, when intimacy becomes transactional, when your brain's reward system is hijacked by artificial stimuli, mental health is obviously going to suffer. But here's what really gets me the most is that we're really not talking about this, or at least as much as we should. It's just become so normalized that questioning it makes you sound like a prude or religious zealot, suggesting that maybe unlimited access to extreme sexual content might not be great for developing minds, and this is somehow controversial. And we've created this culture where criticism of porn is seen as sex negative or anti-freedom, when really it's about protecting mental health and authentic human connection, as well as young growing minds that are growing up seeing this content as normal. And this industry itself is built on exploitation. Behind all kind of glossy production values and sex positive marketing, there's a reality of coercion, trafficking, and abuse. Performers report extremely high rates of depression, PTSD, and substance abuse. Many are pushed into increasingly extreme acts to stay relevant. The industry preys on vulnerable people, often those with histories of abuse or economic desperation. Not to mention that the acts that they're doing in this content would obviously lead to less trust, and also the need for sex would essentially be zero if you've gone through these types of experiences. But ultimately, we're funding this, right? I mean, every click, every view, every subscription supports an industry that profits from human exploitation and psychological manipulation. We've made it so easy and normalized that people don't think about the human cost behind their consumption. Not to say that every part of the industry does this, but it's probably a high percentage. I can't be 100% certain about it. But again, going back to this, the scariest part, right, is that we're essentially raising a generation that thinks this is normal. There's kids who have never known a world without instant access to unlimited explicit content. They don't have a baseline for what healthy sexuality looks like because their introduction was through content designed to be as stimulating and extreme as possible. So, what do we do about this? What can we do about this? Well, first, we need to start having honest conversations about it. We need to acknowledge that this isn't just harmless entertainment, it's having real psychological and social impacts. We need comprehensive sex ed that addresses porn directly, explaining the difference between pornographic fantasy and realistic intimacy. We definitely need better age verification systems and to truly enforce them. I know that some of these are in the works, some are being put into place, but it's not as common. Like I think Texas has some in place, but we really need platforms to take responsibility for the content they're hosting and promoting. We need to support people struggling with compulsive pornography use instead of pretending it's not a real problem. Most importantly, we need to create a culture that values authentic human connection over commodified sexuality. We need to raise kids who understand that their worth isn't determined by their sexual desirability or performance. We need to model healthy relationships and intimacy. Because what is really sad about our society right now is that, yes, this is very normalized and it's almost seen as like, oh, if you don't do this, you're weird for that, right? But it truly is a massive struggle. Like, I know I've seen a bunch of podcasts, especially a big advocate for this is somebody like Terry Crews, who has struggled with porn and had a lifelong struggle of getting over that, getting through it, because guess what? It's an addiction. It's a real addiction, just like any kind of drug addiction. That's what it's comparable to because of the highs you can get from it. And I am not saying that this is anti-sex or prudish. Like, I'm not trying to be that, but it's more about recognizing that we've created a system that exploits our most basic psychological drives for profit, and it's damaging our ability to form a genuine human connection because we've normalized something that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago, and we're only beginning now to understand the cost. The mind is, as everybody should know, incredibly powerful and adaptable, but that means it's also just as vulnerable to this manipulation. When we flood it with artificial stimulus designed to be as addictive as possible, we honestly shouldn't be surprised when natural experiences pale in comparison. I mean, when we normalize violence and degradation as sexuality, we shouldn't be surprised when that's what people start expecting. We have a choice to make as a society and individuals. We can continue down this path, accepting the mental health crisis, the relationship dysfunction, the exploitation is just the cost of sexual freedom, or we can start having honest conversations about what we've created and work towards something healthier. This technology is not going away, probably ever. I mean, the internet isn't going to suddenly become family friendly, and it's not like VPNs don't exist. But we can change how we talk about it, at least. We can change how we educate kids about it and how we structure our own consumption. We can choose connection over stimulation, reality over fantasy, health over addiction. And this isn't an overnight change. It's not easy. And who knows if we'll even see a change in this in our lifetimes. Our brains are incredibly valuable, and your capacity for genuine intimacy and connection is precious. So don't let an industry that profits from your psychological manipulation convince you that giving those things up is normal or healthy, because you deserve better than that, and we all deserve better for that. Thanks for watching what I know is a little bit more of a sore topic, a difficult topic to talk about, but if this resonates with you, there are resources in the description for education and support. And remember, recognizing a problem is the first step towards solving it. Again, thank you guys for watching, and bye-bye.